Hi, I'm David Freudberg. Each week at the Humankind on Public Radio podcast, we strive to practice the simple art of listening. At times it can feel like a lost art in our noisy world, and of course not everything is worth listening to. But for me, when I'm able to get centered, listening can be almost a sacred experience, a moment of focused attention that accords the speaker a measure of dignity. If you value this too, please help others to find our podcast. Consider going to Humankind on Public Radio at iTunes and leave us a kind review. And thanks for listening. This Humankind special, Steps to Recovery, the History of AA, is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund, whose contributors include the Henry Luce Foundation.
Nothing had worked for him, from peer pressure to wife pressure. But Wilson, talking to him one-on-one, obviously had a profound effect. Once he got sober after that final drunk, he stayed sober until he died in 1950.
How the special bond between fellow sufferers gave birth to the worldwide recovery movement of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. From his earliest drinking experiences as a young soldier at a party during World War I, Bill Wilson of East Dorset, Vermont, recalled getting thoroughly drunk. The next time or two, he passed out completely. Thus began his ride on the wild horse of alcoholism. He pledged to his increasingly anxious wife Lois and to himself that he would quit, yet over and over, Bill would drink again. The downward spiral of these repeated relapses endangered his health, wrecked his finances, shattered his self-confidence, and drove him to the edge of bewilderment. But Bill Wilson eventually discovered a formula for addiction recovery that would truly change the world.
Now, people had known for centuries that once an alcoholic, what they called an alcoholic, started drinking, he couldn't stop. Wilson's brilliant insight, in my opinion, was that's not the problem for an alcoholic, stopping once they start. The problem for an alcoholic is, why do you pick up a drink when you've got no booze in your body? Why do you pick up the first drink? It doesn't make any sense.
That's Bill S. of Fairfield, Connecticut. He uses only his initial when speaking publicly about Alcoholics Anonymous in accordance with AA's tradition of anonymity. Bill is a dealer in rare books and an author now writing a history of AA. He's maintained continuous sobriety for over 30 years and has pondered the mystery of alcoholic denial.
Every time you pick up a drink, you get fired, your wife throws you out of the house, you have car accidents, you hurt yourself. There's nothing but problems. You know it. You've sworn on Bibles, I'm never going to drink again. Why, when you got no booze in your body, do you pick up the first drink? Wilson was very clear that we have these alcoholics have these blank mental spots where no matter what happened before, no matter what we said, no matter what we promised, we pick up a drink. And once we pick up the first drink, then we're dead.
You know, when you're an active alcoholic, you're on the wrong train, going down the wrong track, in the wrong direction, making all the wrong stops. And to wrench your life over to a life of sobriety and get on the right track, going in the right direction, making all the right sober stops is a very difficult thing to do.
Alcoholics are up against the formidable foe of addiction. It's described in AA literature as cunning, baffling, and powerful. As one alcoholic told me, other people think you're doing it, but to the alcoholic it feels like it's being done to you. And this exasperating pattern rarely yields to simple willpower. Until the mid-1930s, drunkards were widely written off as incurable and tragic. But 8 decades ago, Alcoholics Anonymous was born. Tens of millions of people in utter despair have since found relief. Keith Humphreys, professor of psychiatry at Stanford University, has studied why AA works.
Well, it has a lot of the things in it that we know changes human behavior. A group who supports and models change. I mean, anybody who's had to join a running group to get the motivation to exercise understands the effect that social support has when we want to improve our behavior. It has modeling. And you can go in and see people who have been sober 5, 10, 20 years and see the things they're doing and go, hey, I'd like to be like that. How is that person pulling that off? How do I do that? And it instills hope. People come in a very bad situation, and then they see other people say, you know what, I was in a bad situation, and now I'm doing well. And hope is a very important part of change. I mean, if we don't believe things can get better, we're not going to try to put in the effort.
In addition to offering hope, AA has formulated specific tools and time-tested practices for maintaining a sober life. These are famously distilled into a short list known as the 12 Steps, and Alcoholics Anonymous is broadly accessible. It's free, it's open to all, and AA groups, now numbering about 65,000 in the United States and Canada, are found in practically every community.
AA is really, the font of most self-help groups around the country now. I mean, it's not just for alcohol or even not just for addictions, but there's many, many other groups concerned with everything from being overweight to coping with cancer to coping with depression that, use a model where you bring people together who share an experience and therefore feel a sense of intimacy and trust, and you learn from each other how to cope with the situation you're in. And that model has clearly been very potent. It's certainly drawn in millions and millions of people now for, 80 years.
In New York, an alcoholic named Ralph B. authored some of the Alcoholics Anonymous literature. He and others I've spoken with knew AA founder Bill Wilson, who died in 1971.
He was a fascinating person. He had a Lincoln-esque appearance. He looked, to my mind, homely enough to be a great man. As he had, and he, to a great extent, I think, played on it too. Tall, lanky, dour-looking, who could flash this wonderful smile or could look like a drowned sheepdog.
He was dynamic. He was a salesman all of his life in the brokerage business. He'd sell you your own gold watch. We used to meet occasionally in New York in the Plaza Hotel, Oak Room Bar there. Used to drink ginger ale and settle the affairs of state.
Bill was a very comfortable person to be around. You wanted to confide in Bill because he was so comfortable. You could talk almost anything with Bill. I carried all my troubles to him. He was like my father or brother.
Nell Wing, not herself an AA member, served as Bill Wilson's longtime secretary at the headquarters in New York.
He had suffered so much, and the depressions, I have big folders on his depressions, and he was always talking to people about how to reach a level of serenity that they could not find. And so many members are subject to depressions themselves. And in this respect, he was enormously helpful. I've heard people come up to him and say, Bill, thank you for saving my life twice. AA's beautiful ability to share of themselves is so based on having walked through the valley of the shadow, that they know what abandonment means, and from themselves and from other people. Something that other people who talk about illnesses, emotional illnesses, don't understand on the outside. They don't understand the depth of where there may be ability to throw off and make light or something like that. But underneath, it's when they talk in the meetings and they talk to each other that you get that feeling. Bill could share that at a fantastic level.
Bill Wilson's tormented journey was dramatized in the 1989 film My Name is Bill W. Academy Award nominee James Woods portrayed the title character.
I feel cheated, angry, always so full of fear. So I drink more, and it makes it okay for a while. I convince myself that things will turn around tomorrow, soon, that I'll make it all up for you, but it only gets worse. I keep promising you. Others, myself. That's it, no more. Going on the wagon, that's it. And I think I mean it, but the guilt and the depression. I can't look in a mirror.
William Griffith Wilson had a troubled childhood. His father deserted the family when Bill was 10 years old. His mother shortly left for Boston, leaving Bill and his sister in Vermont in the care of their grandparents. At age 22, he married Lois Burnham, a physician's daughter from New York, where he would find work on Wall Street. Till the end of his remarkable life, she maintained heroic devotion to Bill despite many agonizing trials. She died in 1988. In the 2010 film When Love Is Not Enough, Winona Ryder depicted the story of Lois Wilson, who would go on to form Al-Anon, a support group for loved ones of alcoholics. Here Bill lies in a hospital bed, trembling after a binge.
Bill, can you hear me? Bill, I thought your love for me would make you stop. But if you can't stop for us, then stop, because you'll die if you don't. I will fight for you. With everything I have, I will fight for you, but I need you to help me. I need you to fight with me. We have to do this together, honey. I'm right here, Bill. I'm right here.
Bill Wilson's frightful descent into addiction would continue even as the consequences of his drinking grew worse. His doctor, William Silkworth, who treated many thousands of drunks, warned of possible brain damage and declared Bill's case to be hopeless. And privately, he informed Lois of her grim choices: have Bill committed, watch him go crazy, or simply let him die. But a new development would introduce a hint of light in the bleakly dark tunnel. Bill's longtime friend and drinking buddy Ebby Thatcher turned up at one point, and to everyone's astonishment, Ebby was now sober. He had joined the Oxford Group, a Christian-based organization popular in the 1930s. Some of its principles of rigorous self-examination, confessing one's misconduct, and making restitution were later adapted to the 12 steps. Ebby had a friend named Roland Hazard, also an alcoholic, who sought treatment by the world-famous psychiatrist Carl Jung. Bill S.
Roland Hazard went to Switzerland to try and solve his alcohol problem. And he worked with Dr. Jung for a considerable period of time, felt that he was sober. He left and promptly got drunk again. And Jung famously said to him, listen, you're an alcoholic of such a type that I just can't help you. There's nothing I can do for you. Nobody can help you. Now, once in a while, I've seen and I've heard of people who have had this huge psychic change, what he called in the first writing of that story by Bill Wilson, a vital religious experience. That phrase was changed to a vital spiritual experience before the book was published. But Jung said the only people I've seen who have been able to get sober and stay sober are people who have gone through this tremendous change. And Hazard supposedly said, well, that's great. He was an Episcopalian. He goes to church. He said, I've got a great religious practice. And Jung says that's a little naive, because clearly the religious practice that you've been doing over the last several years has not been able to keep you sober. You need a vital religious experience that is going to keep you sober. So you need to go back and take your game up on a spiritual level and find a power greater than yourself that will, in fact, allow you to stay sober and not drink again. And Hazard did that, took that advice, and that advice got passed from Dr. Jung to Hazard to Ebby Thatcher to Bill Wilson.
That message from Dr. Carl Jung, a towering figure of 20th century wisdom, apparently was taken to heart by Bill Wilson. In late 1934, at age 39, he lay in desolation at Towns Hospital in New York. Ralph B.
Bill at his highest was in front of an audience telling his story and making it seem the most natural thing in the world that he had a spiritual experience that he accepted in a modest way.
I was, in fact, a child crying in the dark. And I said, as you have said, now I will do anything to get well. Anything to get well. God knows this is more serious than cancer. And indeed, I have a cancer of the mind, of the emotions, and of the soul. Yes, I will do anything to get well. And then, with no hope, no faith at all, I cried out, if there is a God, will he show himself? My experience was granted to me very suddenly. It seemed to me that place lit up in a great white light. In the mind's eye, I seemed to be on a mountaintop. A great wind is blowing, and I know it is not of air, but of spirit. A sense of presence is around and through me. And I say to myself, thank God that I'm a free man.
We're exploring the remarkable history of Alcoholics Anonymous. From its founding in 1935, AA developed into a worldwide support group that has helped tens of millions recover from the ravages of alcoholism. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. To learn more about the 12 steps of AA, and to obtain an audio download or CD of this documentary, Steps to Recovery, The History of AA, please visit humanmedia.org. Bill Wilson's physician had explained that alcoholism is not just a vice or a habit. This is compulsion, he said. This is pathological craving. This is disease. Yet somehow, after Wilson's dramatic flash of inspiration in his hospital room that December day in 1934, he would never drink again. But Alcoholics Anonymous marks its beginning as the following June, after Wilson met the man who was to become the co-founder of AA, Robert Smith.
Well, they were both professional men.
Historian Bill S.
Bill Wilson is frequently called a stockbroker. He wasn't really a stockbroker. He was an entrepreneurial stock analyst. Bill was very, very, very successful with that. He was a very sophisticated analyst and a very sophisticated investor. Bob Smith, on the other hand, was a doctor. He was a proctologist. He'd been in Akron for a number of years, although his drinking had seriously impacted his practice, as it had, of course, Bill Wilson's reputation on Wall Street. He had become a lone wolf down there. People didn't want to talk to him at all by the time we got into the mid-30s. Both of them were what some people might call raging alcoholics at the time, getting in tremendous amount of trouble.
And both had consulted physicians and explored some kind of a spiritual solution, but addiction is a perfect storm of physical craving, emotional disturbance, and soul sickness. And while professionals had certainly tried, and Bill Wilson was in a fragile remission, neither man by that point had found a lasting way out of the addictive trap.
One of the key discoveries, if you will, of Bill Wilson and early members of Alcoholics Anonymous was that the message of recovery, which had always been delivered by professionals or non-alcoholics, typically with little success, could be done with a much higher degree of success by one drunk talking to another drunk. Wilson's famous first encounter with Dr. Bob Smith, for instance, was a conversation that he claimed all he did was tell Bob Smith his story, his drinking problems, his drinking escapades, the low point to which he got over and over and over again, the resolutions he made, and the lack of success he had with getting sober until he stumbled on this formulation that worked for him.
The historic first encounter of these two personalities occurred in May 1935, at a point when Bill had managed to maintain a tentative sobriety of a few months. He had traveled from New York to Akron, Ohio on a business mission to join a proxy fight involving a local rubber machinery company, Bill S.
When he got out there, it was clear they were going to lose that fight. And at one point in his disappointment, Wilson found himself pacing the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio. And at one end of the lobby, famously, was a bar where he could hear the tinkling of glasses and the laughter of drinkers. And at the other end was a phone booth, next to which was a list of churches and the Sunday services. And he paced back and forth, realizing how severely tempted he was to go in and drink and throw away 5 months of sobriety, which he had at that point. He also realized that what had kept him sober for those 5 months in New York, despite the fact that he had gotten nobody sober in New York during that time frame, was that he had worked hard with other people, that he had gone out and tried to find other people that he could talk to and to help. He was trying to help.
By telephone, Bill Wilson reached an Akron clergyman who put him in touch with a woman active in the local chapter of the Oxford Group, the same organization that Bill's drinking buddy Ebby Thatcher found helpful. On Bill Wilson's behalf, she telephoned the home of Dr. Bob Smith, a personal friend whose severe drinking problem distressed her deeply. Unfortunately, Dr. Bob at that moment was passed out under the dining room table. But she arranged for Bill to meet Bob at her home the following day. The beleaguered doctor greeted him warily. Their awkward first conversation is reconstructed in the stage play Bill W. and Dr. Bob.
In that hotel lobby, I knew in my guts, like a man knows he's gonna die, that to stay out of that bar, I needed help. I tried praying, it didn't work. And then I realized that what I needed was another drunk to talk to, just as much as he needed me. Friend, I need your help.
Well, how can I help?
I think you just have.
We could take a little more time.
Okay. I'm listening.
Oh. Well, I use pills and booze every day. I wake up with the jitters and take a sedative to steady my hands for surgery. Start drinking again in the afternoon, need to get drunk to get to sleep. I'm terrified of not being able to sleep.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the operating room, I'm as high as a kite. Oh. Lucky I haven't killed somebody. If I don't drink, I'm a monster. I need it. Booze, it's the glue holding me together.
The monster is our disease.
Oh, God.
That initial exchange gradually deepened into a bond of genuine respect and affection. Bill Wilson soon took up temporary lodging at the home of Dr. Bob and his wife Ann, who welcomed the visitor as a ray of hope. Then at a medical convention the next month, Bob slipped again briefly, but it would be his final relapse. Once back on the wagon, he and Bill approached a hospital patient, a lawyer they would call Bill D. A nurse wondered if he might become AA number 3. At first cautious, the lawyer decided to take them up, a preliminary indication that AA might have legs.
They discover, first off, that they can understand each other in a way they've never been able to understand other people, and second, that helping each other help themselves.
Keith Humphreys of Stanford.
So it was, having someone to support me matters, but also my ability to say, I get you. I'm an alcoholic as well. I understand you. Funnily enough, that helping of other people helped oneself. And that became central to AA's entire philosophy of how a recovery works.
It really was kind of an epiphany by Bill Wilson to realize that only by reaching out to another alcoholic could he safeguard his own sobriety.
Yeah, it's a radical insight, really. I mean, if you think about how mental health services works in general, if you go in as a patient, the expectation is I'm going to be the focus, and the designated helper is going to help me. And it's a fundamental rethinking to say, you know what, I'm going to be a helper and a helpee at the same time. And as it turns out, psychological research done over the years validates that insight, because if we look at the literature on social support, you get some benefit from being given social support, but the evidence is even stronger that you get benefit from giving social support. That seems to be good for our health to help other people.
The dance of mutual support occurs on a level playing field in AA. Since all members have battled addiction, no one can pull rank on anyone else. In a sense, all alcoholics are equal experts. The dynamics of helping each other rely on people's openness, revealing one's own experience with honesty and humility, and listening to others with compassion.
Well, the beauty of sharing your story is you've gone from the abstract to the particular. You're talking about what happened to me. This is who I am. I'm the kind of guy who lost a job. I'm the kind of guy who had a near-fatal car accident. I was a guy who swore off, and I actually swore off for a month. But when I came back and started drinking again after a month, it was worse than it was before. All of those things are intimate. They're personal. They're believable because they're coming from that kind of a source. It's a practical approach. It's a story about what happened to me and how bad I was and how good I got it today because of what I've done with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Antonio Oliart Rose. Editorial assistance from Ken Rogers, Kathy Graham, and Bon Collard. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Dr. Steve Bergman and Janet Surrey for permission to use an excerpt from their play, Bill W. and Dr. Bob. To William White, WSHU in Fairfield, Connecticut, Stanford University, and to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
You can hear more episodes of our series at humankindpodcast.org. That's humankindpodcast.org.
This segment, Steps to Recovery, The History of AA, Part 1, is Humankind Program number 224.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. Please subscribe to our free weekly podcast. The title is Humankind on Public Radio. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcast services, as well as through our website. Again, the podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you'd like to support our program, please visit humankindpodcast.org, and at the top, click on How You Can Help. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Freudberg, and I'm on a mission. Since I was a high school intern in public radio back in NPR's first year on the air, I've devoted my working life to seeking out and disseminating knowledge that I hope will be enlightening and will benefit the lives of our listeners. But the grants we get, the generous support provided from foundations and some others, simply don't cover all our expenses. And if you like what you hear, we're asking for your help so we can keep this going. Please visit humanmedia.org, and at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Thanks. This Humankind special, Steps to Recovery, The History of AA, is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund, whose contributors include the Henry Luce Foundation.
The solution did in fact work for many, not all, but many people. AA was saving lives. AA was turning people's lives around. AA was allowing people to finally discover a way to stop drinking, stop ruining themselves.
How Alcoholics Anonymous blossomed from a conversation between two broken men into a worldwide community. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Today, over 2 million people partake of the storytelling, the good humor, the words of wisdom, and the gallons and gallons of coffee made available at no charge to members who attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. AA's basic text, a thick compendium of first-person stories known as the Big Book, has been translated into more than 60 languages and has sold over 35 million copies in English alone. And now science has caught up with AA. Keith Humphreys is professor of psychiatry at Stanford University.
So Alcoholics Anonymous research was not super strong methodologically for many decades. But in the last 10 or 20 years or so, there's been a large number of rigorous studies, longitudinal studies that follow people over time, that use really good measures of people's drinking and measures of their AA involvement, and use a technique called randomization, which is the strongest method we have to really see, is something actually having an effect versus it just being, is it just these are people would have gotten better anyway, and now they happen to be in AA. And what those studies have shown has been very positive, that, people who go to AA on average drink less than people who don't go. They're more likely to overcome other problems like depression, like social isolation, and so forth. And that has, changed the minds of all people who listen to science from skepticism to a positive attitude about Alcoholics Anonymous.
Is there such a thing as a meaningful success rate with addiction?
Well, all addictions are, chronic disorders. So like diabetes or like, serious low back pain. So we don't think about them in terms of cures as much as we do management. If you take your insulin, can you manage your diabetes? Well, you typically can, but you're still diabetic. So, the way we look at addiction is not so much is it gone, because the person, is still going to have it, but does AA help people, manage their condition, stay sober, and also function in other domains of life? And on that, we have good evidence that it works about as well, or even a little better, than the other outpatient treatments are available.
Humphreys cautions, though, that AA is not for everyone. Some people just can't handle participating in a group, even on an anonymous basis, or they need the structure of a professional intervention rather than AA's easygoing atmosphere of equals helping each other. But because AA charges no dues or fees, and its meetings can be found in nearly every town, it does appeal to a broad community of people seeking to gain a victory over alcohol problems.
think, could have only come out of the American 1930s. After the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression taking effect, for the first time, this go-get-'em, optimistic American culture hit bottom.
Ernest Kurtz wrote Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Here were these people who had been titans of business and doing very well, and suddenly they were rummaging through garbage pails outside of restaurants, and the restaurants were cooking food even though there was no one there. They're trying to put on this illusion that everything's okay when really it wasn't. And this suffused the culture. The Great Depression, people were depressed, really. It was people who had been used to controlling things learned that they were powerless. And I think it was this clash really that first discovered AA, that level of business people who had to confront their powerlessness. So to me, AA could have only come out of the American 1930s. I mean, this is the era out of which neo-Orthodox thought comes in the theology that goes on to the Niebuhrs, the recognition of powerlessness. There are other threads that go on at this time. This is the culture of the moment, and AA is born in this, and it takes its early nourishment from it.
The medical profession at that time was largely perplexed and unable to solve the heartbreaking puzzle of addiction that had wreaked havoc in so many families. The proliferation of rehabs for alcoholics and drug addicts would not occur for several decades, and the stigma attached to alcoholism required that the recovery movement in its infancy function discreetly, without public fanfare, without use of members' last names. But upon the first publication of the Big Book in 1939, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous slowly took off.
AA grew by one person talking to another.
The late Nell Wing, Bill Wilson's longtime personal secretary and the official archivist, recalled the exciting initial spurts of AA's growth.
The spread of AA is a fascinating story. In the earliest days, before we had the book, they felt you had to talk personally to another person. After the book came out, the first group that started from just reading the book was in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we said, oh, that's great, because one member wrote in for the book, read it, talked to other people. Before you knew it, there was 2 or 3 people. It was a group. And that was a very, very encouraging and pep Bill up and everybody up no end, because that meant then you didn't have to, by personal contact, start AA anywhere. You could do it by letter and telling them, sending them the book. And this started then all over the world. Hawaii, you had a group in Houston, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. There was always a little rivalry about who was the first group there. But then there were loners. There were people way out in Wyoming who couldn't get, they were isolated. There were soldiers, there were GIs around the world, in occupation countries, in Germany, in Guam, wherever there was the army had been, finally in Japan.
As peace dawned at the close of World War II, word began to spread about this new fellowship of drunks who were actually managing to stay sober. The need for a program of recovery was acute, and AA would slowly begin to fill that gap.
What we call the Internationals today started in the late 1940s by Captain Jack S. He was a skipper of a merchant marine boat. He was an alcoholic, nobody else to talk to. He wrote to us, wanted literature, and landed in Africa, over in China, over in Japan, the islands or wherever, and went in to the bars and said, do you know another alcoholic? Do you know somebody who needs help? And he had the book. He would leave the book. It was like Johnny Appleseed. All these people carrying the message in those early days were Johnny Appleseeds. There was a salesman who sold window shades to bars, bar rooms, whose territory is up and down the East Coast, he would write to us, would say, look, somebody wants help, so-and-so. He'd take the book and visit them personally, and one thing would, of course, lead to another. So finally, you got a network of various kinds of people. There were people in embassies around in Sweden and Mexico, members carrying the message to at least other Americans at that time.
A seminal contribution of Alcoholics Anonymous has been to set forth the principles of recovery enumerated in the 12 steps. The steps are brief and deceptively simple, but they are rich in meaning. Thousands of AA groups study them in depth each week. The steps of recovery offer a carefully sequenced process of self-reflection, of spiritual growth, of repairing relationships harmed while in the grip of addiction, and of developing a new, healthier life. Historian Bill S.
Well, the origin of the 12 steps is there's a lot of places where the 12 steps came from. Certainly, a lot of the practices that led to the 12 steps originated in the Oxford group. The need for confession, the need for making of amends to people that you have harmed, the need for complete honesty, the need for meditation and prayer. All of those things came out of the Oxford group.
And the steps also were inspired by the world's great spiritual traditions, which held a deep interest for both of AA's co-founders. Bill Wilson was a big fan of William James' groundbreaking book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, published in 1902. Dr. Bob was a serious student of spiritual philosophy, which he would expound on at length. But neither man was religious in a conventional sense. That may have been a factor when early participants decided to establish AA as its own organization, partially in reaction to what they perceived as the religious rigidity of the Oxford group.
As people stayed sober outside of the Oxford group formats, once they started shedding some of the things they found problematic about the Oxford group, and they started opening themselves to other ideas and other things that might help them stay sober. It's a very practical program. And Wilson was interested in what worked. And after a couple of years of this, what he decided what worked was what he finally formulated in December of 1938 into the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3.
Bill Wilson wrote 2 long versions of the Bill's story, his autobiographical story that appears in the big book. As I read both of those stories down in the archive for the first time, I realized that 11 of the 12 steps were almost explicitly, using almost exactly the same language, they were explicitly in those stories. So as he was telling the story of his recovery and the message that was brought to him by Ebby Thatcher from the Oxford group, what he had to do to stay sober, those things are in fact right there in that May 1938 story that he wrote. He later extrapolated out of that somehow, and he claims when he numbered them, found them to be 12.
We're exploring the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, which has helped tens of millions of people recover from addiction since its founding in 1935. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. To learn more about the 12 steps of AA and to obtain an audio download or CD of this documentary, Steps to Recovery, The History of AA, please visit humanmedia.org. The core concept of AA's 12 steps is the alcoholic's utter hopelessness. By admitting complete defeat, alcoholics finally face their absolute inability to control this bedeviling problem through sheer willpower. That may seem counterintuitive, but the principle of personal powerlessness lays the foundation for reliance on a higher power. If I can't fix this, I need to plug into a power source that can. In AA, that's the moment of letting go. It's when the refreshing breeze of recovery can waft in. Over the years, we've talked on an anonymous basis with a variety of people who've used the AA program to heal.
You know, I wrote a fourth step, a moral inventory of myself, you know, and that was really scary, you know, because to someone who ran and hid for so long, to, you know, to sit there and take an honest look at themselves is really hard. It's a really humbling process. All of the steps are, you know, admitting complete defeat is humbling. Believing that there's a power greater than myself, you know, that's humbling too, because that means that I'm not, you know, I'm not all that. I'm not the greatest power on this earth, you know, and that's pretty grandiose to say that, but for a long time I felt that way, you know. I had this huge ego, you know, even though I felt that I was worthless, you know, at times I felt like everything was about me, you know, the whole world revolved around me. That's how I saw things, and, you know, I had to let go of that. Turning my will and my life over to a higher power is extremely humbling, you know. That means I'm not necessarily going to get what I want when I want it. I may not get what I want at all. You know, there's a power out there that knows better than I do, and that's going to help me.
I like the idea of a higher power. I'd had some difficulty with churches and with the formal religions. I'd had difficulty with them. So the higher power appealed to me. I can accept that there's always something higher than we are and higher than I am.
There's some people who insist that that is nothing more nor less than a rather conventional God, white of skin and bearded and male. There are a great many other people who simply say that the important thing is not that you believe in a personal God of any kind, but that you know that you yourself are not God, and don't try to fill that role.
Higher power with me, I understand the whole concept of it. I have a little more difficult time with it. I don't know if it's because I'm still real new in the program or what. I haven't felt a spiritual awakening yet. I know that I haven't done this on my own.
When you give up on yourself, you have to be willing to look for something else.
The late Betty Ford, former First Lady, acknowledged her history of addiction to alcohol and pills. After her recovery, she founded a rehab facility in 1982, the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California. It followed AA principles.
And in giving up on yourself, you ask for help. And some people even go so far as to get down on their knees and ask for help. I find that this is probably when people are willing to turn their life over to a power greater than themselves.
Any alcoholic, if he would get them through his denial enough to realize this, of course he has been putting his life in the hands of a higher power all during his drinking, because eventually the alcohol becomes the all-powerful thing in his life, and his whole life is in the hands really of the alcohol. And so in AA, why he has to, you know, come through that and find some other higher power other than the bottle that he can turn his life over to.
I stood in my own way. I did not surrender to the reality of what my alcoholism was doing to me. I kept fighting to continue to drink the way other people drank. I was a perfectly normal, intelligent person. Why couldn't I do that? That's arrogance for you.
Trying to let go, you know, this simple phrase, let go and let God, that's tough. That really is tough. You know, I give up. You do something, God. Partly, I think modern man has been persuaded since the French theorists in the 18th century to try to be rational and think that he can do things himself, can control things. And I think that's part of the something that's been built into culture in more or less civilized society. And we seem to be finding out that it doesn't always work that way, that we can't control things.
Early sobriety was one of the hardest things I ever did, you know. The obsession to drink and to drug was so strong within me, and every cell of my body wanted to drink and drug, but just there was something inside that knew, that I needed to stay sober. And, I was praying. I didn't have any faith when I first started praying, but I started seeing results, little by little. I was 30 days sober, and then next thing I knew, I was 60 days sober, and just, to me, that's an absolute miracle, But I still had all these feelings, and I was forced to feel them. I didn't have my crutch anymore, I could have looked for other things outside myself to make me feel better, but something inside, I just knew that wasn't the way to go, I knew I had to surrender, and it was really hard, For my first month, I didn't have any feelings. I was still kind of out of it, but probably for the next 2 months, I was crying every night because it hurt so bad.
Your reliance upon a higher power is the bedrock of your sobriety, and I have just seen that work again and again and again. I mean, I came into the program on blind faith when I watched how it worked in other people's lives, and my faith today is backed by experience, and I see how it works.
Alcoholics Anonymous functions at the grassroots level where each individual group, usually consisting of a few dozen people, operates autonomously. Typically, they pass a basket to pay rent at the church or wherever they meet and to buy the books and coffee, but that's about the extent of high finance in AA. By tradition, the meetings stay out of politics, avoid religious arguments and commercial endorsements, avoid anything but helping drunks. There are local and national AA offices where lists of individual meetings are maintained for public access, where the AA literature is made available, where phones are answered. But amazingly, no one actually runs Alcoholics Anonymous, and these traditions are widely followed.
I've been sober since December 1981.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I got sober when I was 38, so you can do the math on that.
Bill S., the historian we've heard earlier, is a faithful attender of several weekly AA meetings in the Fairfield, Connecticut area where he lives and works. He also volunteers considerable time to serving as a sponsor, an informal recovery partner for other members of the AA fellowship.
One of the ways I tell my story is in terms of the 12 steps talk about a spiritual awakening. So an awakening is more of a gradual process, and there's many, many allowances in the book for this gradual approach to a spiritual awakening. And I talk about the different spiritual awakenings I think I've had in my life. And the first one always is, I was early on, maybe 3 weeks out of rehab, and I was at a meeting, a men's meeting, my Monday night men's meeting, and I know exactly where I was standing, and my sponsor was introducing me to people, and they were all very happy guys, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to become a part of this group. Now, for a guy who had been a self-proclaimed and an actual loner his entire life, I hadn't joined anything. I thought people who needed to join things were kind of weak people. I was very much brought up in the John Wayne mentality of if you can't do it by yourself, it's not worth doing, or you're a complete failure. And all of a sudden, I found myself standing there thinking, I want to be a part of this. And that was certainly a critical, key, and important spiritual awakening for me to have.
Making the connection with others.
Making the connection with others. I went from an individualistic approach to life to a communal approach to life. And I still live within that community.
I know that you have personally served as a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. Can you describe that relationship?
My home group, the Stratford Men's Group, is very strong on sponsorship. We have an event at the end of each month where people who have an anniversary that month get a coin, but you don't get a coin celebrating your anniversary unless you have a sponsor who can give it to you. I have a sponsor. I have two sponsors at the moment. One I've had for 33 years and the other one for about 4 years. And I sponsor a bunch of men myself. My wife tells me too many, but it's just the way it goes sometimes. I sponsor, 15 guys, I think, these days. And it's a responsibility that I take very seriously. I turn to my sponsors for help and advice with real regularity. And I try and give that same sort of support and advice and help going in the other direction.
And do these consist of sort of one-on-one conversations?
Yeah, they're one-on-one conversations. These days, those are phone calls. I get a lot of phone calls during the day. I sponsor 15 guys. I probably get 8 phone calls a day. And most of those people I see at meetings. So I not only talk to them on the phone, but I run into them at meetings. I see all of those people. I go to 4 meetings a week, and I see people that I sponsor somewhere in each of those 4 meetings. It's one of the requirements for people I sponsor. I have to see you in a meeting. And then, of course, with modern technology, we also do emails, we do texts.
And people wonder why it is after decades of abstinence from alcohol, you would feel the need to continue attending AA meetings. Are you fighting off a craving that rears its head sometimes?
The desire to drink is something that doesn't really go away, but it's certainly with me, it's lessened over the years, over the decades. When I was first sober, it used to rear its ugly head every 30 minutes. And these days, it doesn't happen all that often, but every so often, I get one of those blank spots Wilson talked about, where I'll be sitting at a table having dinner with 6 people, and 2 of them are drinking red wine, and it's a great Bordeaux, and I can smell it, and I think, God, I just love that. Boy, maybe I should just try that. I haven't had that particular vintage. So that does happen.
But today, you don't yield to that temptation. What interrupts the desire, the tendency to go ahead and drink now that you've been sober in AA for so many years? What is the shield that protects you from having a slip, having a relapse?
Well, David, everybody's different on this, I think. My particular shield has always been the people that I've grown close to in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's my particular shield. It's very clear to me that the way my psychology works is other people are keeping me sober.
You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Antonio Oliart Rose. Editorial assistance from Mark Kilstein, Kathy Graham, and Bond Collard. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5-LISTEN. That's 1-800-5-LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5-LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
This segment, Steps to Recovery, the History of AA, Part 2, is Humankind Program number 225.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.
To hear more episodes of Humankind, you can subscribe to our free podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast player. A new episode each week. The podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you enjoy this program, be sure to leave us a kind review at iTunes and Stitcher. If you want to support the program, please visit humanmedia.org. And at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Again, our web address is humanmedia.org. Thanks.